Hello, hello. And so, welcome to the 4:30 on Thursday session. And walking into this room, I can tell that the technology experts who were prior to us should have done something about the air conditioning. And so please bear with us. I think you'll find this conversation at least stimulating enough to keep us awake, despite the heat. And that's the challenge for this incredible panel of mine. Now, I'm Susan Scott Parker from Business Disability International. I'm going to say a few words about the context for the conversation we're going to have today. But before I start, I'm just going to quickly introduce our panel. So here we have Victor Riega Garcia, who is Responsible Business Integration Manager from Wraithbones Group. We have Christopher Patno, Google Lead for EMEA Accessibility and Disability Innovation. Crosby Cromwell, Principal Strategist, True Blue Inclusion, and Senior Advisor to the German Marshall Fund. And we have Shani Dandy, Disability Inclusion and Accessibility Consultant, broadcaster, author. And it says here you're the most influential disabled person in the UK. So maybe we have some competition in the room. I'm happy to take that on board as we proceed. Now, I wanted to open just by saying that I went to Michael Fenback a while ago and said, this is the 20th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. Where's the celebration? Where's the champagne? Thank you. Whoever's at the back there, I appreciate that. Because, of course, it's really an important question. And I was looking back, and as founder of the first business disability network the one in the UK, I was reminded that we brought 60 companies together with the Alliance of the Trade Union Congress and the Disability Rights Movement in the United Kingdom to actively campaign for more rigorous disability discrimination legislation that, as our member companies were saying, would finally position disability rights alongside race and gender as a business and ethical and so on imperative. So this resulted in Europe's first disability discrimination legislation in 1994. The government at the time refused to believe that the private sector would actually ask for legislation that was credible in the eyes of both business and people with disabilities. But you can read it in Hansard, it's absolutely true. And at the time, we felt we were part of a global movement with a Disability Rights Commission established that realized its job was to help the United Kingdom and everybody in it to understand that disability really was a rights thing. And we thought that our job with the Business Disability Network was to persuade business that treating people properly, treating people fairly, on an equal basis, was good for business, but that the two came together. And we started using phrases like, we treat people differently to treat them fairly, the essence of reasonable adjustments. We started saying things like, we're promoting the business and ethical case, but notice I said ethical, I didn't use the word rights. The business and ethical case for the best practice that I labeled disability confidence way back in 2003. And then, of course, the CRPD comes through, hugely significant, even if not directly applicable to the private sector. But as we moved away from direct reference to rights and equality, thinking that somehow we were risking alienating our target audience, which for us was very much the private sector, if, as a speaker said on Monday, that the very word disability is scary, we started to think that maybe the phrase disability equality was too scary and that somehow we should try to soften the message up a bit. I was even called a covert human rights campaigner, like a secret human rights campaigner, because it turned out that everything we were asking the companies to do in terms of best practice just happened to be what they would do if they positioned disability as a human rights, employment rights, consumer rights imperative. I'm beginning to think I got it wrong, and that's really the focus of our discussion today, and that it just isn't possible to promote, it's not possible to enable disability rights if we never say the word rights out loud. And certainly, we need to be starting to say the word equality out loud is the question I'm going to be asking my panel. So I'm suggesting today that the language of inclusion and equity will never persuade a business to position disability as both a business and a human rights priority. So I see this conversation as more of a debate, really. I'm hoping somebody will disagree with me completely. Because this is the 20th anniversary of the CRPD, and we still hear inclusion is a journey. And I said to a friend the other day, well, I guess not robbing a bank is the choice, right, is a journey. The point is, are you really saying that it's okay not to treat disabled people properly, fairly, equally now because you're on a journey towards inclusion, and that we just have to wait a while? So my thoughts are that we need to come back to the CRPD basics. All that messaging around discrimination, equality, fair treatment, and that we can define disability equality. It's very difficult to define inclusion other than in sort of soft language about feeling like you belong. So I'm going to just flash up my definition of disability equality, just so that we can get a common understanding of what I mean by equality. If that slide could go up now, team, that would be helpful. And then I'm going to turn to my colleagues for comment. And so there are 4 things that I tell a business they have to do if they're going to get to the point where people are being treated, people with disabilities are being treated on an equal basis. They don't make assumptions, so there's none of this blind people can't work here stuff, deaf people can't work in teams. They're going to make the businesses barrier-free for groups of people with similar access needs as possible, accessible websites, ramps. They're going to also make the reasonable adjustments for individuals, because disability discrimination is experienced by an individual who can't get that extra 15 seconds on that video interview because of his stutter. And then fourthly, well, I kind of think it's important that you also align your behavior as a company with the ILO labor standards. Equal pay for equal work should apply for people with disabilities. That, for me, is what disability equality is all about. And it is doable and implementable and seeable and all of those things. Right, done my bit. Now, I am having fun with this because I get to say things, ask questions of this panel that I haven't had a chance to ask in public before. So I'm going to start with Shani. And I want to say, Shani, you are described on your website as driving diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mm-hmm. Why are you not described as driving equality and human rights?
Thank you for that question, Susan. I just want to do a quick visual description for anyone that needs it. I'm Shani, a South Asian disabled woman. I am a South Asian woman and I have a short stature. So DE&I, diversity, equity and inclusion, is the language that many organisations speak. And in my experience, many businesses are still on that journey of embedding it, getting it into their culture, and even understanding what that means for them and constantly reiterating it. We are living in times at the moment where people are now having to call it something else but try and do the work, but I'm going to let my US colleagues talk more on that. But the truth of the matter is that when you talk about rights, or being, people describe me as an activist, that feels very confrontational for businesses. So quite simply, it helps to open doors strategically, commercially, because it's hard to get in. It's hard to get in the door. It's hard to speak to the right people. And it's hard for people within organisations to actually find credible people to work with on disability inclusion work as well. So even though the label doesn't say it, it doesn't mean to say that my work isn't based in rights. It's anti-oppressive, it's about anti-ableism, based in disability justice principles. So I think the question is less about labels, but is the work hitting all of those objectives?
Okay, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, for the record, I'm going to sit here as Christopher, not as representing Google, just for the sake of having a fun conversation. For me, when people talk about rights, lawyers get excited. And so businesses get afraid. So I don't think we need to talk about rights at a business level, because it does force people to think about, if I'm not doing this, if the goal is rights and I'm not doing this, I'm going to get sued. being from the US, specifically California, there's a few lawyers that want to take a lot of money out of a few people. And I don't think talking about rights accomplishes what we want it to do. It may be the right thing to do, but if you can't lead the horse to water, you can't get them to drink. If we want people to make a change, we have to make them possible for them to do the change.
We've been drinking for 20 years.
Apparently they're still thirsty because no one's made the change. Talking about rights will stop people from acting.
And it's not the same people for the 20 years either. We all know the same old story. It's different people come in, different strategies come in, priorities change. So I'm sure many in the room would agree with me. We often have to say the same things every day through gritted teeth and a smile. It's probably the 10 millionth time we've said this. So yeah, it's been 20 years, but it's not been the same people and decision makers.
Yeah, this is such a nuanced conversation, and I come in with that we are all for each other, like that's where I start. But it's, Christopher, it's what you said, to me it's a yes and. Like, rights-based language is only radical in systems, institutions, places where that language isn't normalized, or where inequality and equity, our rights are ignored. So rights-based conversations are essential in systems where they're not understood. But what's happened is we've got so much advancement, so much protection. We have basically the second generation moving into the workforce past the CRPD, past the ADA and other rights-based legislation. We have to allow for the advancements that have come with the conversations of equity, inclusion, diversity. We need that. Rights-based language is the foundation. Those are the walls, the doors, the everything beyond. So I think it's a yes and to both.
You stole my
We're not going to get past the
thunder.
first question at this rate.
But yes, I agree completely. I think it's there is space and there is need to have a conversation where the view of an approach from a inclusion equality side is as important as making sure that this is understood within the framework of human rights. And that's important because, and I'm a lawyer, so I get excited when I hear about rights. It's important because many businesses put resource and attention to begin with, sometimes when they have issues around compliance, when they have issues around risk, when they have issues around, potential problems, let's say, that may come around with their colleagues and employees. So for me, it's important to make sure that those two sides of the same coin are discussed and used at different stages and with different people in the business, so that we can make the most of these conversations.
I knew this was going to be fun. So when I hear someone say, inclusion is a choice, this is a phrase that you see quite frequently now. Diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. So that means treating people properly is a choice. It's all we're after with this disability rights thing. You're entitled to reasonable adjustments. That's how you treat people on an equal basis who have disabilities. I refuse to do that because I'm on a journey, and inclusion is a choice. So I can choose not to treat you properly. It's implicit in the phrase inclusion is a choice. Comment? Lawyer?
I think there is an issue with interpretation here, and I don't see inclusion as a choice in the sense that I could or couldn't do it, and that has no consequences for me as a business, because some of those choices might not be real. They are innate, and you might need to be careful about some potential discrimination and legal risks. But also it's not a choice from the perspective of ensuring that you have the best workforce that you can have to serve your clients in the best possible way. So there is a difference, I think, between not having an immediate legal recourse if you don't do something from an inclusivity point of view, and the fact that you actually have the freedom to act or not to act when it comes to inclusion. So I think there is a difference in there that we have to be mindful of.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to add was when we see that phrasing, diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice, and there's lots of different iterations on those things. It's trying to, it's framing it all in a bit of a euphemistic way. It's trying to make it palatable to people who are either learning about it for the first time, need a refresher, or just really do not want to have the conversation. So that's the kind of space that we're in, and the terms diversity, inclusion, and equity are used very interchangeably, and their real meaning has got lost. If we asked everybody in this room what those words meant to them, we'd have very different answers from everybody. And the final point I wanted to make was equality in the general DE&I industry isn't seen as best practice. Equity is, because equality doesn't go far enough. Because if we gave everyone the same thing, it wouldn't work for everybody, it wouldn't meet everybody's needs. So there's also a fundamental different level of understanding.
You see, my definition of equality says you have to make adjustments for individuals. You can't treat everyone the same. It's an outdated understanding of what equality means. The Americans with Disabilities Act said you had to make adjustments even before the CRPD said so.
And that's what's being taught as equity.
But it's not. Equity, I asked an American, I'm Canadian, by the way, did I mention that? I asked an American, a scholar, how she defined equity, and she said, it's compensation to historically oppressed groups. That's because it comes out of the American tradition. The word diversity comes out of the American tradition, right? Affirmative action and slavery and all of that. It's an historical concept. And so I'm just challenging here to say that actually equity in many cultures is heard as the value of your house after you've paid your mortgage. Right? As you say, these words have really lost their meaning.
Christopher?
Christopher.
I think words have tremendous meaning. And I think we need to realize that an a-hole is an a-hole is an a-hole. If you want to oppress someone, you can, and you do. I think the reason we have these kind of words is because we want to empower people to actually try and fail if you want to try to do it right. I teach a lot about progress over perfection. It's not that you don't want to make something accessible, it's you can't make something perfectly accessible for everyone. So change your language, change the goals. So if you want to sort of talk from the EA perspective, is either 100% or zero, that's not particularly helpful.
What do you mean EA?
The European Accessibility Act. Whether you are compliant or not, it's either 100% or zero, because you're not compliant. The reality is much more subtle, it's much more gray. So I think we have this opportunity when it comes to this kind of language to provide guidance in terms of what does it mean to want to be on that journey, because if you care enough to be on the journey, you're gonna try. But if you're a jerk, you're a jerk, and there's nothing we can do about that.
And I'm with Christopher, I'm with Christopher that words are incredibly important and we need to continue to have these conversations. Equality is the open door, is the starting line. Equity is the outcome. Like, we need definitions that we continue to push along with our rights-based language, our rights-based legislation. It's the hand in hand of the two of them. And to your point, I do think it's culture versus what is defined by law. So if it's, I'm blanking on the word I want, but if it's defined by law and a company is putting it in place because of legislation, sure, you can have an accommodation, but how does it feel to sit at your desk with that accommodation? How does it feel to go to the lunchroom? That's about culture. So whether it's the base root of the bottom line of you're doing it because you have to, or because you are inviting, welcoming, allowing disabled individuals to prosper within your organization, those are two different things.
So
Compliance, that's the word I wanted.
compliance is like fertilizer. It's smelly, and if it's the only thing that you do, it smells like you know what. If this is your job, it's not a great job if all you do is compliance. What you want to do is take the compliance and teach your culture, your environment, the nouns and the verbs of how to do this, why does it matter, apply this fertilizer into the garden of your culture, and then you get to create something beautiful. But if all you're doing is compliance, you're going to smell like it.
Absolutely, and I think to take your metaphor a little bit further, is
Please, not too far.
And there's been no alcohol consumed in this panel, I promise.
I would say in the wider responsible business and sustainability sphere, compliance has been a fantastic fertilizer, fantastic tool for us to open conversations. So to get into a starting point and then be able to start working on issues that go beyond compliance. So compliance is not in itself a bad thing. It's a bad thing when that's the only thing you want to do. And I think that's where we try to push back and say, yeah, this is only the bottom line. This is let's say the baseline. We need to do a lot more.
And that's the risk if you start talking about rights too early. Because then all people care about is not getting sued. Then you're focused on compliance.
That's America, though. It doesn't happen so much here. If only they got sued more often, we might have more attention to this.
I don't know, I'm looking at the European Accessibility Act. We had years to create it, years to get it enforced. It's being enforced and they weren't ready. And we have the situation where we don't know what compliance actually means. We don't know what the ramifications are. So people are starting to ignore it. And it's going to be, and I fear it's going to be at risk because the infrastructure wasn't set up. So if you shoot only for compliance, you don't know what to comply with. If you shoot for innovation, now you're creating something that's useful.
Just 2 seconds here. Just 2 seconds. Because I think sometimes you need to, let's say, you need to fly before you learn to walk. In terms of taking your example, if I think of something that it's applicable in the UK, the anti-slavery, the Modern Slavery Act 2015, it was enacted at the time when I think many, the systems, the frameworks weren't there to be able to comply with it. But the fact that it came out, it forced a lot of businesses to start working on it. So I think sometimes not being ready can actually be quite helpful. Not always, but sometimes.
The thing I hate saying out loud this week, too, is I think we need real difficult conversations in our community now. I mean, I sat in a room this week and heard a global disability leader, you referenced it, say that the word disability is dangerous. I don't know what we're doing if that's the rhetoric that we're taking inside the companies, the institutions, the organizations where we're trying to advance our rights, our power, our justice, everything that we are. I think Sinead mentioned it the other morning on the opening, I think our definitions are outdated. I don't think they've kept up with where disability has advanced. I think we need to have real conversations about universal definitions that are where we are now. And I think that also comes with us having real conversations about what ableism has done to our own community and where we have internalized that, and we are taking it into the conversations in which we are trying to create change.
Okay, I want to come back on compliance. I want to come back on compliance because
You said you wanted to debate,
I
right?
do. And I wish we had another half hour because that's really rich territory. But if I could come back on compliance, because we were talking about how we influence business first, and the message for me has always been that it's good for business to treat people properly. My worry about the word inclusion is that we miss that bit about treating people properly, which you can't wait for. You don't wait for another couple of years while your diversity manager figures out how to spell disability because you're not treating people properly now. We hear gender equality as a phrase. That's okay. And Kate Nash was saying...
But are they done?
No, but the point is they can still talk about it, but we don't even talk about it, right? And so Kate Nash was saying, many of you will know Kate from Purple Space, that maternity leave, a woman feels in the UK entitled to maternity leave, which is going to cost thousands of pounds to her employers, but she hesitates to ask for a £300 new piece of kit because she has a disability. She doesn't feel entitled to the piece of kit that would let her do her job, which is where I get into that's treating her properly on a rights basis, is to give her the entitlement to a £300 piece of kit. Shani.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. But when you go throughout life, and as a disabled person, and I'm speaking as a visibly disabled woman, and all you ever met with is suspicion, and if you need something, prove it, that also plays a massive part in that. I have loads of internalized ableism. I was petrified to ask for adjustments when I finally got my first job, because I struggled so much to get into the workforce. But also what doesn't help is persistent charity and medical framing of disability. We're still fighting that. Low visibility of structural discrimination. I don't think businesses really fully understand all the barriers and the way, how structural discrimination presents itself. There's massive fragmentation within the disability movement. There's all these issues that stack against where we're trying to get to, and I've just touched the iceberg.
The top of the iceberg,
Yeah.
and you're alluding to the bottom of the iceberg. And you? Camille?
So what's interesting to me about what you said is we're in this moment of scarcity because we're seeing funding being pulled back, we're seeing all these things pulled back. So now this is why we fight amongst ourselves. I need my piece because if I don't get it, I can't do it, and you can do off and do whatever you want. So to bring this concept of not being scarce, not being afraid, we need to step up for ourselves. And I think what happens is if we leave to lawyers, we're never going to have what we want. But until we become strong enough to ask for the things that we need, as you said, once you got it, once you have the strength to do it, you're able to get those things. The more noise we make, the stronger we are, the stronger we ask, the stronger we demand, then people can't say no. Because if we do this together, then we have weight, then we have strength.
And I really agree with that, but it's so much easier said than done. If it's easier for me to not risk being plunged into systemic poverty and not ask for an adjustment, when I wasn't as confident as I now think that I am, I'm not going to do it. And so I definitely agree. We've got so much work to do on empowering disabled people, but it's still never going to be the perfect solution.
So here's where the rights come in, because if it's our right to ask for these things, then we don't have to have fear. So maybe we have to take the rights for ourselves.
Yes, finally, yes. The words rights does appear in this debate. It really does. Because for me, the issue with compliance is the compliance culture says, I'm only going to treat you properly if you can prove you're disabled enough to trigger a legal obligation, which is like everybody in the business hears, well, we know what that's saying. They don't actually value their people at all, Victor, in terms of your vision of a workforce that actually feels trusted and valued. But unless there's some sense in the system that in order to treat all our employees properly, we have to give them the tools they need and the flexibility they need. Oh, and by the way, we have a legal obligation to do that. Oh, and we start to win because we enhance productivity. Everyone who's communicating to business about these issues needs to be more adept at those kinds of messages. If it's just about inclusion, they never hear the business about treating people properly, being good for business, and that the compliance culture doesn't get us where we want to go. But by the same token, breaking the law doesn't help anybody.
I'm concerned in my rhetoric. I'm trying to make sure that I am being nuanced and not blaming us, because businesses absolutely have the responsibility, both legally, morally, ethically, to step up and do the right thing. I think there's an understanding around maternity leave. It's time-bound, there's constraints to it, you know the definitions, you know exactly how to put it in place, you know exactly how to get people back to work, and that does not eliminate the fact that women have fear, in interviews by saying that they are pregnant or needing maternity leave. I do not want to diminish that conversation either, but where I worry about blaming back to our community is that our definitions are so diverse that the bad actors and companies or organizations are allowing the water to go through the cracks, right? It breaks the cement open because there's too many definitions, there's too many structures, whereas maternity leave is structured.
Yeah.
So where we can work together to get clearer definitions, to get clear structures, and make business do the right thing when they are the bad actors or the medium actors and not just doing it because they know it's good business, I think that's where we can help ourselves. And I didn't say from the beginning, I'm coming to this conversation as a white, cisgendered, neurodiverse woman, so that's the lens I see the world through.
Yeah, and I think, you've mentioned, thank you, you've mentioned something that is, as I was reflecting on the themes for this conference, I was thinking that there is a bit of a siloed approach where we find ourselves. I'm thinking from, for example, the business and human rights practitioners. We often cluster around familiar issues like labor, modern slavery, supply chain, indigenous rights, data privacy, etc. And these areas have been studied, have been major regulatory issues around them. There have been some prominent, apologies, global campaigns and even litigation cases. You know, you hear the Shells being sued by communities from countries in Africa and etc. By contrast, when we look at disability, this is, as you said, it's being framed historically more as diversity and inclusion than a hard human rights issue. And also the challenge is that disability is a cross-cutting issue. You cannot define it in the one single type of human rights issue. So it becomes more difficult for practitioners to work with it and ends up being everywhere. And by being everywhere, it becomes invisible in a way, which is quite paradoxical. So we need to find a way of ensuring that, those human rights professionals come a bit closer to us and work with us. We get closer to them. We work with businesses around that to make it seem like it's not an unsurmountable barrier. We can work on this. Yes, there are so many different types of disability and so many different issues to deal with, but we can work together.
Victor, in your experience, would most human rights advocates that you know working in business, would they instantly know about the CRPD, the convention? Is it actually at least in their worldview?
I think the most experienced ones would have a level of awareness of it, but the large majority wouldn't necessarily have a good understanding of the convention. And I have to, admit it myself, I'm not as familiar with the convention as I am with many of the other human rights instruments. And I think that is something that is similar across the sector.
And I see that as an opportunity to start a new dialogue, if you like, because for me, anybody working as an advocate on business and human rights would be a natural CRPD evangelist once we reach them with the right messaging.
And something more in here is that many of us see this as a very highly specialized area, let's say. And there's been historically this fact that there's been disability-related issues have been tried as a community, a close community type of action. So it feels wrongly as if we have the disability community over here and the rest of human rights practitioners over here. And that doesn't help the cause.
Doesn't that follow the natural path of how disabled people and disability communities are usually excluded from other movements as well? We see, all across society, whether it's pride celebrations, whether it's cultural celebrations, where, different communities, where when they even claim to be intersectional and very inclusive, all disabled people are still always excluded, so that kind of doesn't surprise me.
I think some of this has to do with the fear and stigma around disability. I think that may have something to do with the fear and stigma that is around disability. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to get yelled at. But the stigma is real, and it's cross-cultural. Google did some really interesting research in Africa trying to understand the impact of assistive technology, and we learned that people still today believe in witchcraft and being cursed. And if you have someone in your family who has a disability, someone in your family did something wrong. Yeah. So this is in our world, and because of that, people are afraid. And because they're different, they're scary, they look different, they talk different, they think different. I don't know how to react with you in this sort of ableist moral way. I'm not going to put myself at risk and be offended or offend someone else out of fear. I think, and then that combined with the fear of implications in business,
Yeah.
that combined with the perceived false costs,
Yes.
people aren't going to want to fight for it.
And I think we need a better understanding of the language that we use. We need, therefore, arrive to a unifying narrative where this is seen as part of, from a business point of view, for example, this is seen as disability rights are a business and human rights issue. And I think there are opportunities to work together more closely. Like, a quick question, how many of you are familiar with the business and human rights, the guiding business and human rights principles in here? Yes, it's a few of you. But how many, is there currently a guidance that incorporates a disability angle as well from that point of view? I think the closest to a guidance that I've seen is something from 2017. So there is an opportunity to collaborate. I think there is an opportunity to, for example, if you want to make it more urgent, because there is no sense of urgency for businesses to address this issue that is seen as important but not urgent. To address that, we need to have access to guidance. And one of the things that could be done, and I'm probably jumping the gun here, and probably was a question about what we could do.
The script just went to hell anyway.
Okay, that's fine. So it's basically, why couldn't we get together and develop a guidance that brings together the human rights issues, the equality and inclusion issues, and the guiding principles? Because that is what a lot of businesses use and have been trying to apply in the past few years. So there are opportunities there. We need to just try and find them. I say just, but we need to find them and work for them. It's a good time for that.
Yeah, Victor, what you said is so powerful, and the separation between the communities or disability being over here is really powerful to me. And I have to question, Shawnee, it's why your voice and what you said is so important. We have to look within our own community, and as part of what is hindering or slowing or separating us, the fact that we are, or have been in great part, led by white, male, cisgender individuals. We have to look at the diversity of our own leadership for the inclusion across the board of human rights. We need more individuals of color in positions of power across our disability community to start to bring the diversity into our own conversations and to infiltrate where we can across the human rights legislations and boards.
So one thing that I think is important, a challenge to these ideas, is that because language matters, culture matters, which means what works in the US may not work in England, what works in England may not work in India, what works in India may not work in Kenya or Brazil. So coming up with a taxonomy that's fair and true and real is going to take effort in each area. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. People of determination. Breaks my heart. But when I talk with people who live in Saudi, they say, yeah, this is totally normal. This is totally right because this is their culture. And so we can't expect to export our, I broke the camera. We can't expect to export our culture and have the impact that we want. So this has to be something that's done locally, based off a common framework, but it has to be done locally.
Absolutely. But I would like to raise a challenge here. That is a challenge that's been around from the very beginning of human rights, which is the argument that human rights are culturally, they are different depending on the culture. And that's been always a challenge in the sense that if slavery, for example, which is one of the issues I'm a bit more familiar with because of the word, if modern slavery and exploitation is wrong in the UK, it would be wrong in Singapore. The fact that Singapore allows people to come in and be registered through a Singaporean agency and be taken, their passports taken away from them and only allowed to go back to their families once a year, and insurance be taken on their health, but the beneficiary is the employer, not the person who's falling out. That is not culture. And I think there is a danger that in trying to localize the implementation of human rights, we distort the essence of it, which is dignity. At the end of the day, disability rights, human rights are about human dignity. And the fact that we might not be able to implement them in the way that would be good practice or best practice in country A as opposed to country B doesn't mean that it's culturally localized. It just means that we need to have a different approach and have a build step-by-step approach to those countries where this is a bit more challenging. But let's be careful and not assume that what is right in A, if it's a consensus, let's say, by those who have studied and practiced human rights for many years, is not going to be right in B because their culture goes against it. Let's be very careful on that.
And I'm thinking of a deaf individual trying to open a bank account who can't because they'll only communicate by phone. Does it matter what country he's in? Is that a rights issue? Is that an inclusion issue? Because we talk about employment all the time, but actually consumer access. And so actually one question I did actually haven't planned for you, Chris, was the language of accessibility. Chris talks to zillions of people every day about accessibility. Is that heard as meaning you're entitled to accessibility, that there's a right to accessibility? Because of course, to digital accessibility, I mean, because of course the CRPD does require governments to enable digital access to rights, right? It's right there. How do you think the word lands now?
Not once do I hear people mention rights. More often than not, when I talk with someone when they're just getting started is, well, what is it, and how do I do it? And after a while, they'll say, oh, that's really cool. How do I do it more easily? Because I want to do it, but I want to make it more possible to do it more and to do it well. Not once do I hear rights. Again, because I think a business will think of a human rights issue as one that is going to put us at risk. If we acknowledge it publicly that it is a human rights issue and we don't fulfill it, we put our business at risk. So the rights come from enforcement. And the enforcement comes from a definition that's common. If we don't have a definition, there's nothing to enforce. If there's nothing to enforce, it can't be a right. If it's not a right, how do we kick people in the butts to get it done? And because the conversation, it's the right thing to do, works for some. It's a business advantage that works for others. Our competitors are doing it before us, that's another one. Different people are motivated by different things, but not once do I ever hear people talk about human rights.
And so is the European accessibility legislation going to make it harder for them to avoid the fact that now you can be sued in France if your websites are inaccessible to customers?
But that's not a rights issue. That's a law, but that's not talked about as rights.
You go ahead,
No.
I've been interrupting you far too much.
It is a rights issue. I really believe that it is a rights issue. Part of what we continue to need legislation to go back to the roots of rights legislation that we've had in the past, but the EAA focused on business is fundamentally about the rights of disabled individuals to access products, services in equity.
So let me clarify my comment. I'm not saying it's not a rights issue. I'm saying businesses don't see it as a rights issue.
I respectfully disagree.
Good.
Because once you have the law protecting it, that's where you have, the rights enforcement mechanism. But another thing I wanted to raise is that sometimes the discussion is a lot about the label, but what you need to look is what is the substance below it. So let's take the example of people never mentioning human rights, otherwise it doesn't work. When I was working in a company, one of our markets was China. We were very clear we wouldn't be able to use the terminology that we do normally use in Europe in terms of human rights. What didn't change was what we were looking for underneath. If it was, making sure the employees were being kept safe from discrimination, if it was about, making sure that hours were reasonable and et cetera, we continued doing that. It was more a tactical decision, as you point, not to use the word human rights, because in that particular jurisdiction, that creates a massive rush, let's say, and closes doors. But what is underneath is what, at the end of the day, matters.
One more open it up. I already have people waving at me.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that whether or not a country ratifies the CRPD, a disabled person really still has to rely on the domestic law. So it still has its limitations, and that's hard. And even if you exhaust all of that and then try and make further complaints, you know, it's still, the individual burden is still on the disabled person. They have to be able to afford it or have help to, you know, to do that. So, like, yes, it's great on paper, but how does it really help?
But that links to something that is vital in a democratic society, which is access to justice. If there is no access to justice, most rights will not be protected. And that is the same for able or people with a disability. So I think when we talk about justice and access to justice, that goes all the way from making sure that those with money are the only ones who can access the courts, making sure that those who go to the courts have appropriate support so they understand what the proceedings are about, and many other things.
I don't think we need to go into justice because the world is in a state right now where justice is in some places at risk. So I don't think this argument works as well as we want it to, just because of the nature of what politics is happening around the world.
If we were crafting a campaign and trying to figure out which words to use for which audience, you're right. At the moment, justice doesn't seem to be top of the list. I know I have a wave here from someone who wanted to come in. Was it about the word accessibility and what Chris was saying, Sven? Please just say who you are and the name
Sure.
of your organization, please.
Sinead Burke, I lead the team at Tilting the Lens. It was more about access to justice and more about the European Accessibility Act. And Shani, your point around the individual burden. I was at an event 2 weeks ago, and the regulator of Sweden for the European Accessibility Act talked about how few complaints that they as a nation have received from disabled people. I asked them, how did they reach disabled people? And they said, we did 3 webinars. They were not joking. And they are doing a broadcast. And the expectation then is that disabled people either have the resources to access justice or the knowledge of their rights. They do have a right as consumers within the EU to access particular services, but there is very little strategic communication and advocacy being done at a grassroots level. There is a reliance on DPOs and not-for-profits who are not resourced and not empowered. I do think the businesses are incredibly familiar with the fact that they have a legal obligation to adhere to disabled people's rights. However, they are hoping that they do not know about it and that they do not complain. So my question for all of us in this room is, what are we doing to advocate with disabled people the understanding of their rights and their right to complain? But speaking of language, since time immemorial, disabled people have been considered to be complainers, and now we're asking them to be literal complainers without doing any of the unpicking of the stigma and the ableism, and then we're wondering why the law is not working, because we're not testing it.
Right. I'm tempted to ask people to comment, but I want the audience. You wanted to come in there, did you? Someone wearing the pink sweater?
Yeah, it's me, Dr. Magda Charlotta, Humanity in Action. Thank you for this very vibrant panel. I loved it.
Is that a code word? We're looking
No,
at
I
what words
love it.
really mean.
I love it. Hashtag rights, hashtag human rights, hashtag social justice. My question to you is, what I'm feeling from this conversation is that the power relation between our community of people with disabilities and businesses is still uneven. Even the way that you are sharing your immediate experience on how to, say, navigate, opening doors, not to, say the wrong word and lose a potential ally within business. And I'm quite curious, what would you suggest to people like me, an advocate? How can we build more power when relating with businesses, and not to be afraid, as you rightly said, not to be afraid that we actually lose the sole opportunity to have a conversation with business partners? Thank you.
That's a jolly good question. We could have another half hour on that one. Hold out one for a second, panel, please. Is there one more before I ask my panel to respond to that? Okay. Shani, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, great question, and I guess it kind of sums up my entire job. So look, I start by being a nice person. They are already scared. We've spoken a lot about fear. There's a lot that they probably don't know. It's really about holding their hand through it. Should I have to do that? No, but I want positive outcomes. That's why we all do the work that we do. And it's meeting them where they're at and understanding their level of ambition as well, I would say, and helping them understand what their legal obligations are. You can do things like audit where they are, see where they need to get. It depends on the specific scenario, but it starts by being compassionate, because I don't think people really get up in the morning and think, you know what, today I'm going to discriminate against loads of disabled people.
Today's the day.
Today's the day. I don't, yes, some people might do it intentionally, but on the whole, I don't think people do. And so when we come in and berate people and make them feel bad about something they feel that they should already know, it makes everybody's work in this space harder.
We have a bit of a time thing here. Christopher, can you come in on that?
What's interesting to me is we assume that the people, the man is the same. People are hard, people are complicated, people are motivated by different things. So you can talk about this heteronormative, cisgendered, old white guy. Well, no, that's not me. The man is just a person, and they are motivated by different things. So to your point, as an advocate, what can I do? We need to have compassion and empathy with leaders to understand what motivates them, so that we can align our language to something that allows it to be driven into their heart and their head. Threats alone don't work. You need to convert the heart and the mind to make this happen. And that's hard when you're talking about human rights and CRPD, because that gets people scared. So what this really is it's a language of empathy into leadership, so we can explain to them in their words why this matters. And then it's easier to have the conversation. So talking about it in CRPD and human rights, that closes off the mind, maybe not the heart. So I think starting with that language is risky. But once you get them moving and you down that conversation, then you can bring, oh, by the way, did you know that this is also? But by that time, they've already started nodding with you, and then you can move them along.
Just humanizing everything, basically. Yes. Yeah, sorry.
I would add to, I spent 8 years within Walmart and was at the heart of the company's best intentions. And I spent far too long confusing power, or mixing power and altruism. And those are two very different things. And I think at the end of the day, companies are companies. To Christopher's point, there are good actors inside those companies who are trying to advance the change that we care about. They're trying to build better cultures. But at the end of the day, it's also a company. And so I think we have to, from our position, come understanding the language of business, come understanding KPIs, come understanding ROIs, come understanding what the company will get out of the relationship with us. It is not an altruistic relationship in total or at the end of the day, and we have to understand the power the disability community brings to those companies in employment and product and yada yada at the end of the line, and know that language.
And in 6 seconds, what I would say is it's all about building relationships. We love collaborative NGOs. And the current state is much better than it was 15 years ago, when it was all about campaigning, criticizing, and etc. And we can make more progress by collaborating with NGOs. Don't forget, the other thing is make connections with those who put the money into the companies as well, investors. Once investors start asking questions, companies start paying more attention. And finally, get into the benchmarks. We started a business and human rights world benchmark, and that is being used nowadays. But I don't think we have anything on disability in there. So there is an opportunity there, and I'm more than happy to put you in touch with the people that manages that. So, thank you.
And I'm just going to summarize by saying, in my experience, people in the disability community spend a lot of time entering into the reality of people with disabilities. We need to enter into the reality of the good actors in these companies, paying as much attention to understanding their world, asking the questions, not talking. What would you do in my shoes? What are the business drivers? What are your priorities for next year? You know, could you mentor me? Could you just give me lunch every 3 months and help me to figure out what I'm doing in this space? So being just open to say we've got people with disabilities and people in business. And all too often we're talking about people with disabilities and business, right? Woo. And actually once we start thinking of these creatures as people, I mean, some of my best friends work in the private sector. Hey. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, my panel. Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated. Oh, yes, pictures. One picture, one picture. I've been told I have to have a picture. Can somebody